Tanse everyone, Oki, bonjour, hello. Welcome to another fabulous Tuesday. And the weather is gray, but it's not super freezing like snow a couple of days ago. The weather has been so strange, but Mother Earth does what she needs to do. And so yeah, Tanse, Oki, welcome. My name is Chantal. I am Cree, Anishinaabe, and Métis from Muskeg Lake Cree Nation in Saskatchewan and Treaty 6 territory. I make my home here in Malkinstis in Treaty 7 territory. I'm very thankful and humble to live here where I am, and I always think it's really important just to acknowledge where you are, where you've come from, and also where our ancestors that have been here and connected to the land. So I really thank the Blackfoot of Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani for just the teachings. I've learned so much from those, from people from those nations, from elders from those nations, and I'm very humbled to have learned and continue to learn. I think that's the important part, to continue to learn, because that's what building community is. It's about listening, it's about learning, it's about growing and understanding. I acknowledge the Sarsi Dene, the Beaver people from Tsutsuna, and the Stoney Nakoda from Morley, which includes Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. I also honor the Métis of Region 3, which is why I proudly wear my Métis sash to act as that bridge between Indigenous and non-Indigenous culture. And it's really just important to create a sense of place and a sense of belonging and a sense of connection to the land. So even I tell people when they're trying to figure out their own land acknowledgement to understand how their ancestors got here. Are they first generation, second, third, fourth? Many families don't even go back more than about 7 generations. And so it's really about being present and understanding, well, what brought those families here? Was it an opportunity? Was it for education? Was it for prosperity? Was it for escape? And so when you start to put those things into perspective and you think about the Indigenous people and what they've had to suffer and what was removed from them, those freedoms, the ability to be themselves, and their children taken away from them. I know intergenerational trauma affected my family, and I was just very thankful and humble to be able to break it with my own children. And so my children have never grown up experiencing that hardship, but we still have many families that are struggling, and the reason for that is to make space for settlers, to make space for the people who came here for those opportunities. So those same opportunities were taken from one people to give to a next. And so when we do the land acknowledgement, it's acknowledging that we all need to do better, that we need to come together to learn about that history, to learn about that past, so that we can own it, we can learn from it, we can grow, and we can build a better world for all of our future generations. And yeah, so I'm going to share the Cree welcome song. It is always just such a beautiful way to start. I feel like I'm calling in my ancestors every time I sing this song, and it really, to me, it's just inspiring. It's my way. I feel like my mushrooms with me, my great grandfather. I feel like all of my ancestors are behind me when I sing this song. I feel like all all ancestors just are gathering while I was singing this song, so it's just a gift to be able to share it. I honor the Nataha family from Sturgeon Lake for sharing this song originally, for keeping this song alive, and for really honoring the teachings that we've all shared for many, many generations. And yeah, I'm just really thankful for families like the Nataha family for keeping these songs alive. I also just wanted to acknowledge that when we sing this song, it's a little different. We sing it in rounds of 3 as opposed to 4 for the 4 directions of the medicine wheel. 3, we keep the circle open and welcoming so people can come in and out as they choose, as they please. And it's such a gift to welcome people in and out. And it's like our heart. Our heart has that ability to open, to let people in, and to, when people leave our lives, to be able to heal. And that's really what that open circle represents as well. And so Miasin, which is the Cree welcome song, it doesn't just mean welcome, it also means beautiful. So I'm going to stand up to sing and slide my chair all the way up. Awesome. Miasin, Miasin, Hasemina, Hasemina, Epeitakote, Niwagomagan, Hota, Niwagomagan Hota Homa Kitaskino Miyasen Miyasen Hasemina Hasemina Epetakote Niwagomagan Hota Homa Kitaskino. Hi everyone, and welcome to the circle tonight. So I have been singing all week, so my throat's a little tired. So I'm going to share a few stories tonight as well as some songs. But the first story that I wanted to share, because it's been on my heart and in my mind, was the story of the chickadee. And the chickadee not only teaches us how to listen, but that we have two ears and one mouth. And so the chickadee story that I know of, it's not just the chickadee, it's also the owl. And so a long time ago, when there was a time when we actually spoke to the bear, and the bear would always warn us and give us a heads up, and we knew how to live well on the land. There was a husband and wife, and they would always go hunting, and they would bring their three children with them year after year, and their children always knew, how to behave, how far to go. But of course, as they were getting older, they were getting more and more curious, and they started to wander further and further out. And whenever they would go hunting, the mother would always say the same story, make sure that you're never out when the sun's at its highest, because when the sun starts to take your shadow away, it gets lonely. So grandfather's son might take you for his own. And the kids just thought that was mom's way of saying get home on time for lunch. And then she said at night, make sure that you're never out when grandmother moon's at her highest, because when those shadows start to disappear, she gets lonely, so she may take you for her own. And they always thought that was just their mom's way of saying get home in time to go to bed. And so they didn't really think much of it. And so this just seemed like a normal hunting trip, like they normally would go on every single year. And so the mother and father kissed their kids goodbye after lunch and went hunting and said, okay, kids, just make sure that you're back in camp by the time supper is around. And so they went off hunting. And as they went into the forest to do some hunting and to look for some amazing animals like they normally would find, they came across the bear, and the bear warned them. He said, this year there are so many animals, there's an abundance, and so you might lose track of how many you're taking. And just remember that you should never take more than what you need, because if you take more than what you need from the earth, Mother Earth will take something back from you. And they said, of course. They always knew better than to take more than what they needed for the year. They only ever took what they needed. And so they went off, agreed to, with the bear, and went off hunting. But then they lost sight of each other. The mother went down into the valley, and the father went far across a field. And as she went down into the valley, she saw an abundance of animals. There was so many moose, an incredible amount of moose, a lot of deer, some elk, and even some buffalo. And so she thought, there's no way that my husband is going to find this many animals where he is. I should just hunt what we need for the year for our family, and then we won't have to hunt anymore. And so that's exactly what she did. She hunted all that she needed for the family for the year. Quite proud of herself, she began her way back to where they were staying at the camp. But her husband, at the very same time, had found so many animals in the clearing. There were tons of buffalo, an incredible amount of elk, deer, and even moose, which weren't very common in that particular meadow. But because there were so many of them, there was such an abundance, the father said, well, there's no way my wife's going to find this many, so I'm going to hunt what we need for the family for the year. And so he did. And he took all of those fresh kills back to, of course, get them prepared for the trip. And as he arrived back at the same time as his wife to the camp, they realized their mistake. They had taken twice as much as what they needed for the year. And they knew that meant that if they weren't careful, the earth was going to take something from them. And so they told their children, all right, children, the only way that we're going to be able to bring all of this meat back, because we can't let any of it go to waste, is, well, we're going to have to take 2 loads. So one load will take as much meat as we can, and then the second load will take all the rest of the meat and you. But you're old enough that you can wander around and you can take care of each other, and we'll make some pemmican before you leave. Pemmican is smushed meat with berries. It's like meaty and sweety. It's delicious. And that was their favorite thing, and said, yeah, of course, Mom and Dad, of course you can do that. And so the mother made sure there was tons of pemmican for them. And again, she warned her children, remember, do not go out when the sun is at its highest, because grandfather's sun gets lonely and could take you for his own. And they said, of course, Mom, thinking that was just their mom's way of saying, get home in time for lunch. And then she warned them again, and at night, do not go out when the moon is at her highest, because Grandmother Moon gets lonely and she will take you for her own. And they said, of course, Mom. But they just thought that was their mom's way of saying, get to bed on time. And so they didn't think much of it. And they kissed their parents goodbye, and their parents went with that first load back to the village. It was a little bit of a trek, so they were going to be gone for at least a couple days. And the children wandered further and further and further out, exploring places that they had never explored before. And then they realized it was getting late. And so they went home and they had a wonderful rest. And when they woke up in the morning, they decided that they were going to explore even more new places. So they started to wander further and further and further out until they realized the sun was starting to get high, high, high up into the sky, and that their shadows were slowly disappearing. And then they laughed, we should run back before our shadows disappear. So they ran faster and faster and faster and faster until they dove into the teepee, making it just before grandfather's sun hit its highest point in the sky, taking their shadows away. And so they laughed and saying, oh, this is just Mom's way of saying, get and eat lunch on time. And so they laughed about it. And then they decided to go exploring some more. They wandered further and further and further out. And it was getting so late, and they started to realize, wait a second, Grandmother Moon was getting high, high, high up in the sky. And oh no, it was almost high moon. So they ran home as fast as they could, and they dove into the teepee, and they laughed and laughed and laughed that this was just their mother's way of saying, get back to bed on time. And so they didn't think much of it. The next day, they yawned, and they stretched, and they went wandering. And they wandered further and further and further out, further than they'd ever wandered before. Before they knew it, they were so far from camp, and they noticed their shadows were disappearing. And so the brothers and the sister ran back to the camp as fast as they could, and they made it just in time. They beat the sun and dove into the teepee, and again they laughed and laughed, saying there's no way grandfather's son could possibly take them for his own. Could he? And so they laughed again. And then they laughed about Grandmother Moon. Would Grandmother Moon take them for her own if they stayed out too late? And then they laughed again. There's no way. Could she? And so they didn't think much of it. And then they wandered further and further and further out. And the little boys were exhausted by the time they got back. And they decided to go to sleep early. Well, the little girl, she had the biggest golden eyes and the most freckles you'd probably ever seen. And she was curious. She was always curious to see what the world looked like at night. She wanted to wander to all of those far spots that they had seen during the day to see what they looked like at night. And so, as her brothers snored away, she snuck out of the teepee and started to wander further and further and further away until she came to this unfamiliar clearing. In this clearing, there was these funny plants she had never seen before. They seemed to open in the moon, and they had the most magnificent smell that she had ever smelled before. It was definitely her favorite smell ever. And when she looked at the flowers, they reminded her of the color of the moon. And they also reminded her of one of her favorite skirts that would always swish and swish when she would spin. And she started to smile, thinking of the memories of that skirt and the fun that she had had dancing and dancing in the moonlight in that skirt. And as she was thinking, and as she was smelling these wonderful flowers, she started to lose track of time. And the moon started to get higher and higher and higher in the sky until finally it was almost at its highest point. And as she took her nose away from the flower, she realized that Grandmother Moon was getting so high in the sky and lighting up everything with the most beautiful, divine, white-blue glow. But she had to rush back to the teepee, so she started running and running and running until she couldn't feel her feet on the ground. All she could feel was the wind rushing past her face. She felt so free. She put out her arms, and she felt like she was flying. And then she realized she was flying. Her arms had turned into wings. Her feet had curled beneath her. Oh no! Grandmother Moon had taken her for her own. And she knew she had to warn her brothers that her mother was right. So she flew back to camp and she tried to open the teepee, but birds cannot open teepee flaps. And so she decided to wait until her until her brothers woke up. And so she waited and she waited. And as the sun came up, her eyes got heavier and heavier and heavier until she fell fast asleep. Her brothers woke up wondering where their sister was. They came out and said, "Sister, where are you? Sister, where are you?" And they called back and forth across the forest, but they could not find her anywhere. They searched high, they searched low, they searched everywhere, and they couldn't find her. But then they came into an unfamiliar clearing. This was a clearing that they had never seen before. There was these flowers in the clearing, magnificent flowers, big, round flowers with bright, beautiful yellow and red and orange petals, being ones they'd never seen before. They even had big seeds in the center that they ate, and the seeds tasted good, but the shells not so much. The boys were so distracted by these incredible flowers, and they watched as the flowers turned and turned, and then looked up and up and up, and they realized that the flowers were following the sun. How amazing! But then they realized the flowers were almost looking straight up. Grandfather's sun was almost at its highest point. They had better run back. And so they started to run faster and faster and faster towards the camp until all they could hear, it wasn't their footsteps anymore. It sounded like the beat of wings. It was strange. So one brother looked at the other and said, "Hey, can you hear that?" And said, "Whoa, you're a bird!" And the other brother said, "What are you talking about?" And, "Whoa, you're a bird!" And they realized Grandfather's sun had taken them for his own. Mother was right. She was telling the truth, and they didn't listen. They had to warn. They had to warn their sister. And so they flew back to the teepee, and they tried to open it, but little birds can't open teepee flaps. And so they decided to wait, watching over the door to the teepee until their sister returned, next to this funny little bird that they had never seen before. And so as they sat right next to this bird that was remarkably bigger than them, with beautiful freckles, it kind of reminded them of their sister. Well, they waited, and they waited, and they waited, and they waited, and the sun started to go down, and their eyes got heavier, and heavier, and heavier, until they fell fast asleep. And then the beautiful young sister of theirs woke up, and she fluttered her feathers. She looked over these two funny birds beside her, and she said, "What are these funny birds? I've never seen them before." They looked, and they reminded her a lot of her brothers, with their black caps. They looked just like her brother's hair, but she thought, there's no way Grandfather's son took them for his own. Was there? And then she heard a clamoring of a wagon and some horses, and she knew that was her parents. And so she went and she soared closer to them, calling out, "Mom, Dad, it's me!" And all that came out was, "Woo woo, woo woo." And she'd never heard that voice before. And so she circled Mother, but she circled silently. The mother barely noticed her. But then when the mother got to camp, she was calling out for her children, and they were nowhere to be found. So she started to worry. And so she started to wander further and further and further with this funny bird following her no matter where she went, until finally she ended up in that unfamiliar clearing with those incredible flowers. And as she leaned forward into those flowers that looked like the color of the moon, she smelt them. And the smell reminded her of her daughter. And just in that moment, as she opened her eyes, that funny bird landed right in front of her and looked up with its big golden eyes and all of those freckles and cried out, "Woo-hoo! Woo-hoo!" And as the mother looked down, she realized, well, that wasn't a funny bird at all. That was her daughter. She recognized her big golden eyes. She recognized those beautiful freckles. She said, "Oh, my girl, Grandmother Moon, she has taken you for her own. Well, now you must protect all of the children in the night. You and the Moonflower will guide all children and keep them safe and keep Grandmother Moon company so she will never take anyone else." And the owl nodded her head and called out, "Woo-hoo, woo-hoo," knowing that this was a gift that she had now that responsibility of. But her mother said, "But where are your brothers?" And they looked high and low and they looked everywhere until finally the sun was coming up and the sister, the owl, was getting so exhausted. So she flew up into the tree beside those two funny little birds and she fell fast asleep. Until those funny little birds beside her woke up, shook themselves off, and they saw their mother. And they said, "Mother, mother!" But the only sounds that would come out were chickadee-dee-dee. And then the other brother said, "Let me try." And then he tried, "Cheeseburger." Those were the only sounds that they could make. So they tried to get their mother's attention, but the only sounds that would come out were chickadee-dee-dee-dee, cheeseburger. They didn't know what to do. So they followed their mother everywhere she went until she ended up in that same unfamiliar clearing with those beautiful flowers following the sun. And as she watched the flowers go up higher and higher and higher, she saw the seeds inside and she tasted one. She spit out the shell because the shells were terrible, but they reminded her of her sons. And then as she turned around, she saw the two little birds jumping up towards her, crying out, "Chickadee-dee-dee-dee, cheeseburger!" And she realized those weren't funny birds at all. Those were her kids. Those were her sons. She recognized the beautiful black caps, their beautiful black hair, and their playfulness. And she said, "Oh, my boys, Grandfather's son has taken you for his own. Now you and the sunflower will protect and guide all children and keep Grandfather's son company so he will never take another child from this earth." And from that point forward, the chickadee protects us during the day, as does the sunflower, and guides us in a good way. And the owl protects us at night, as does the moonflower, and guides us in a good way. And that is the story of the chickadee and the owl. And now I'm going to share the Chickadee Song. The Chickadee Song came through me in ceremony. I was in a sweat lodge and I was asking for a song, and every time we would open the lodge door, the chickadee would come in and be like, "Chickadee-dee-dee-dee, cheeseburger." They were just calling from the side. But then the third round, it got so hot that everybody left. And, oh, no worries, Paul. Aw, you're at John Cleese? So jealous. Sorry, I totally got distracted there. I saw John Cleese, I'm like, I love that guy. But yeah, when I was in the lodge, the third round was so incredibly hot, and I'm used to sweating in Arizona, so it wasn't that bad. I was able to stick around and stay in. But as everybody left, the little chickadees started coming in and out of the door of the lodge and looking at me and just going, "Chickadee-dee-dee, cheeseburger." And I was like, "Oh, this is your song. So this is their song. This is the Chickadee Song. So it teaches us to listen, because in the story, if the parents would have listened and stuck together, they wouldn't have left the children, and it wouldn't have been a problem. If the children had listened to their mom, they wouldn't have gotten taken by grandfather sun and grandmother moon. And so, yeah, there's a lot of listening that needed to be done in that story for sure. But this is the Chickadee Song. Normally we do it as a call and response, because it's just so much fun that way. Sore. So I'm going to share another story that I haven't shared in a really long time. This is the Cree creation story, and yeah, so a long time ago. So a long time ago, before we were created for the second time, because we were created first time, but we kind of made a hot mess of the world. And so Wasakajak, who is the Cree spirit, he's kind of like Nanaboju a little bit. He's a little bit like Napi. He's a troublemaker. He is a creation spirit. Sorry, he's a creation spirit. And he was tasked with teaching us how to live on the land. He was supposed to teach us how to honor the animals, but he didn't. He was supposed to teach us how to honor the land and harvest medicines in a good way, but he didn't. He was supposed to teach us how to honor fire, but he didn't. And he was supposed to teach us how to honor the waters, and he didn't. And basically everything that he was supposed to teach us how to do, he didn't. And if you don't teach your kids how to do something, they will just go to town. And so we made a whole mess of the world. We destroyed the waters, we made them sick, and so all of the wildlife that was in the waters ended up dying, with the exception of a few of the things that were able to make their way up onto land just to protect themselves. Um, Many of the animals were just driven to the brink of disappearing, and so they started hiding and avoiding the two-leggeds, us, at any cost. The air was sick, and so the air was getting harder and harder to breathe. And so the two-leggeds started, fighting for food. They started fighting for water. They started fighting for air. And because we didn't know how to harvest the medicines properly and we were devastating the earth, they started fighting over the earth itself. And so, as all of this fighting happened, eventually the two-leggeds just started to kill each other off until there was only one left, and he was so sick and so depleted that he was on the verge of death anyway. And so Creator thought, all right, so we definitely need a do-over. We need a mulligan here. And so we're going to start anew. And there was a huge crash of thunder, and it began to rain. Now, Jack, who sometimes doesn't listen, even when Creator's like, hey, there's a huge crash of thunder, pay attention. And so Jack was under a tree, just casually laying down, having a little bit of a nap right by his favorite river. And his feet were dangling quite close to the river until the river started to creep up over his toes. And he thought, well, that's weird. So he pulled his feet up from under him. Then he continued sleeping. But the river kept creeping higher and higher until it hit his knees. And he thought, oh no, this isn't good. And he thought, I don't think this rain is going to stop. Oh no, I think Creator's sending a flood. He's going to make the world new again. But we got to save all the animals. We got to save, and we got to rebuild the earth. So what are we going to do? So he thought about it, and he thought, I'm going to go ask the smartest animal I know, the beaver, because the beaver represents wisdom. And so he went to see the beaver, and he said, Beaver, beaver, there's a huge flood coming. We have to be able to protect all of the animals, and we have to be able to protect the world and rebuild it. What are we going to do? And the beaver thought for a moment, and she thought, and she thought, and she said, oh, well, I suppose we should go and talk to the cedar tree. The cedar tree is the oldest living creature in all of creation. Well, so far. So she should know what to do. Maybe she's faced a situation like this before. And so Beaver and Jack went to see the oldest living cedar tree. One of the only trees standing after all of the devastation of the two-leggeds. But there was something very special and magical about her because she was so old and ancient. And so she stood strong and proud. And the beaver said, Cedar, Cedar, there's a huge flood coming. And we have to be able to save all of the animals and be able to rebuild the earth. What are we going to do? And the cedar said, well, Beaver, you will need to cut me down and hollow me out and create a big boat so that all of our friends can be saved and so that you can rebuild the earth. And Beaver said, no, I don't want to cut you down. I couldn't. You're so old and wise and wonderful. I can't cut you down, Cedar. And the cedar said, that's okay, Beaver. I knew this time would come. I knew this day would come. And don't worry, I will be back. And so, very reluctantly, the beaver cut down the cedar tree. And as she chomped and chomped and chomped, there was a loud crack that just shattered across the world. And all of the animals woke up and knew that this meant it was time to gather. But where would they gather? And then as the tree fell, and it hit the ground, whoom, it shook the whole earth. And all of the animals knew exactly where to go. So by the time the beaver was done hollowing everything out, hollowing the cedar out, all of the animals had arrived and climbed on board. When the last animal climbed on board, there was a loud crash of thunder, and it began to pour harder and harder and harder and harder, and it continued to rain for what seemed like days and nights and days and nights, but nobody could really tell because it was so dark and cloudy and overcast, and it just looked the same way all the time. Until finally the whole earth was flooded. All of the rivers burst their banks, all of the oceans rose to meet the rivers, and there was nothing coating the earth but water. And as they looked over the edge of the boat, the earth sunk down deeper and deeper and deeper until it disappeared beneath the blackness of the waves. And all of the animals thought that this would never end. It was just raining for days and nights and days and nights, and they didn't think it was ever going to stop until one day it did. It stopped. They knew they had to rebuild the earth now. They had to go talk to Wasakajack, and they said, Wasakajack, Wasakajack, it's time to rebuild the earth. The rain had stopped. And Wasakajack said, yes, it's time to rebuild the earth. I don't know how to do that. Let me go talk to the beaver. And so he went to the beaver and he said, Beaver, you're the smartest animal I know. We need to rebuild the earth. What are we going to do? And the beaver thought for a moment. And she thought, and she thought. And she said, well, I suppose we would need earth to rebuild the earth. So someone would probably need to go down to the bottom of the ocean to grab some earth so that we could rebuild. And Wasakajack said, that's a great idea. Who's going to do it? And the beaver said, well, I'm a pretty strong swimmer. I can try. And so the beaver jumped out of the side of the boat. She dove down deeper and deeper and deeper, but it was so far down. There was no way she could have held her breath that long. She swam up to the surface and she was out of breath. She said, don't yawn. She said, Wasakajack, it is so far down. I don't think anybody could reach the bottom. I don't know anyone who could hold their breath that long or dive that deep. And Wasakajack said, well, there's got to be someone. The divers. The divers, that's a great idea, Beaver. Maybe the best diver could reach the bottom. And so all of the animals took a poll and decided that the kingfisher was definitely the best diver. So the kingfisher soared high, high, high into the sky, dove straight into the water, cutting it like a knife, and used his wings to dive down deeper and deeper and deeper, but it was so far down, there was no way he could have held his breath that long as a bird. And so he swam to the surface and said, Wasakajack, it is so far down, I don't think any of the divers could reach the bottom. And so he climbed back in the boat. And Wasakajack said, well, somebody's got to be able to reach the bottom. What about the largest animals? The largest animals should be able to reach the bottom. And so he asked all of the animals in the boat, who is the largest and who could reach the bottom? And the bear said, well, I'm definitely one of the largest. Let me see if I can try. And the bear jumped into the water, but it was just after hibernation season. So the bear had a lot of extra weight on him. So he just kind of bobbed in the water for a while until all of the animals said, oh, bear, get in the boat. This is unbearable to watch. Just like my puns, they're unbearable. All right. And so the bear climbed back into the boat, and the moose said, well, I'm one of the largest animals, and I'm a great swimmer. I can reach the bottom of lakes all the time. The bottom of the ocean shouldn't be that much further down, should it? And so she took a deep breath in, deeper than she'd ever taken before, and she dove down straight into the water. She dove down deeper and deeper and deeper, but it was so deep, there was no way she could have held her breath that long. So she swam up to the surface and said, oh, Wasakajack, it is so far down. I don't think any of the biggest animals could reach the bottom. And so she climbed back in the boat. She said, it's deeper than any lake I had ever seen before. I'm not sure anyone could reach the bottom. And Wasakajack said, well, somebody has to reach the bottom. What about the fastest animals? The fastest animals could hold their breath the longest because they could probably swim to the bottom the fastest. Maybe they could reach the bottom. And so he asked all of the animals, who's the fastest swimmer out of anyone? And the otter said, I'm the fastest swimmer out of anyone. I could probably reach the bottom. I can hold my breath for a little bit of time and I could probably reach the bottom. And so she took a deep breath in. And then she dove down deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, but she couldn't reach the bottom either. She swam up to the surface and she said, Wasakajack, it's really far down. I don't think anybody could reach the bottom. I could reach the bottom and I'm a really fast swimmer. And so she climbed back in the boat. And she wondered if anyone else could dive to the bottom. And then all of the animals said, well, what about the best swimmers? There's got to be one animal in here who is the best swimmer. And the turtle said, well, I'm probably the best swimmer because I live both in the sea and on the land. And so everyone asked, well, could you reach the bottom? And the turtle said, I think so. Let me try. And so the turtle took a deep breath in. She dove down deeper and deeper and deeper. She was getting so deep in the water, but the pressure started to squish her harder and harder and harder until there was a loud crack, which scared her, and she blew out that bubble of air, and she swam to the surface and said, oh, Wasakajack, it's so far down. I don't think I could ever do it. the pressure cracked my shell. And she pulled herself out and she looked, and her shell had 13 bumps cracked into the center and 28 ridges along the outside. Huh, that was kind of a strange combination. She said, with Sackerjack, I don't think anyone could reach the bottom if I can't reach the bottom. And so all of the animals started to feel pretty hopeless. As the fastest animals couldn't reach the bottom, and the biggest animals couldn't reach the bottom, and the best divers couldn't reach the bottom, and the best swimmers couldn't reach the bottom, how were they ever going to rebuild the earth? And so as all of the animals were feeling sad and a little overwhelmed, there was a little voice inside the boat that said, I can do it. All of the animals looked around and said, who said that? And again they heard that little voice, I can do it. So they looked around again and said, who said that? And the tiny little muskrat made her way through the crowd. She puffed out her chest proudly and said, I can do it. And all of the animals erupted in laughter. The biggest animals started laughing at her, saying, oh, muskrat, you're so tiny and puny. If we couldn't reach the bottom, how are you supposed to reach the bottom? The best divers started laughing at her. If you can't dive near as deep as we can, how are you supposed to reach the bottom, muskrat, if we couldn't reach the bottom as the best divers? Then the fastest animals started laughing at her. Muskrat, you're so slow. How are you supposed to reach the bottom? We can reach the bottom really fast. And then finally the best swimmer started laughing at her, saying, oh, muskrat, you are not a very strong swimmer. If we couldn't reach the bottom, how are you supposed to reach the bottom? And so as all of the animals were laughing at her, she was very determined and said, I can do it. And so, without anyone paying attention, she stood on the side of the boat. She took the deepest breath she had ever taken in her life, and then she dove down straight into the water. She dove down deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And then everyone in the boat realized, wait a second, where's Muskrat? They realized she dove into the water. And so they looked over the edge with big smiles on their faces, waiting for her to come back. And they waited, and they watched her little teeny tiny self disappear into the darkness of the ocean. And they waited, and they waited, and they waited. And they knew there was no way that anyone could have held their breath that long. And as they watched into the darkness, they saw a little bubble of air floating to the surface. And they knew that that was Muskrat's last breath. Oh, and they were so worried, and they started to cry. They cried and they cried, and they filled the ocean with their tears, which turned it salty. Wasakajack continued to look into the waters, looking for any sign of Muskrat, any sign of life. And after what seemed like forever, Muskrat's tiny little silhouette started floating towards the boat. And as it got closer, they realized that was Muskrat's lifeless body. As it got close enough to the boat, Wasakajack reached in with all of his might, and he held that beautiful muskrat to his chest. And he cried and he cried and he cried so hard he wiped all of the color off Muskrat's belly. And as he continued to cry, and all of the animals felt so overwhelmed, they said, Muskrat, Muskrat, she sacrificed herself trying to save us. And they began to feel bad for laughing at her. And as they were crying, Muskrat's tiny little paw flopped open, and in the center of her palm was a little ball of earth. Muskrat had done it. She had reached the bottom. She had gotten earth, and they could rebuild the earth, all because of Muskrat's sacrifice. All of the animals felt so happy, so overjoyed that they could rebuild the earth, but so sad. They had lost such a beautiful friend in Muskrat. Wasakajack knew it was time for him to get to work. And so he asked all of the animals, who will hold this earth on their back? And the turtle said, I will hold this earth on my back. And so the turtle climbed into the water. And Wasakajack took that beautiful piece of earth and he rolled it in a circle. And as he did, it got larger and larger and larger and heavier and heavier and heavier until it pushed the turtle completely beneath the waves. And as the land spread out, it became all of the land that we see now to this day. Wasakajek said, "Now it is time for me to get to work. So everyone, go to your four corners of the earth where you will thrive and live happily until the next session of Two Lillygits comes along." And they laughed. Then they went through all four corners of the earth, and Wasakajak got prepared. He took a deep breath and he blew to the east. And as he did, Grandfather Sun came out from behind the clouds. He warmed the earth, and as he did, all new life began. Little seeds started sprouting in all of the earth. All of the animals became very pregnant, including the creepy crawlies, all of those bugs, and they began having babies everywhere. And then Wasakajak took a deep breath and he blew to the south, and as he did, the earth began to rumble. It began to shake. Huge mountains started reaching to the sky. Huge rolling hills started rolling all over the sides. There were valleys and fissures and huge deserts, and all of the land masses that we see to this day started to develop. And then there was a rumbling and a shaking, and huge ancient trees grew tall into the sky, and they reached their roots deep into the shell of Turtle Island, holding us strong on her back. Wasakajak took another deep breath. And as he blew to the west, Grandmother Moon came out from behind the clouds, and she pushed with all of her love, and waters rushed over Turtle Island. She pulled back and they receded. She continued to push and pull and push and pull until all of the waters that we see to this day were laid down. The rivers and the oceans and the streams and the coulees and the muskegs and the ponds and even the puddles. Everything was born through that beautiful water energy of Grandmother Moon. And then Wasakajak took another deep breath and he blew to the north. And as he did, the winds began to spin. They began to spin faster and 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 faster until all of the animals were like, "This is too fast!" And Grandmother Moon and Grandfather Sun started pushing and pulling and pushing and pulling with all of their love and all of their might, creating the days and the nights and the weeks and the months and the seasons and the years for time immemorium. Wasakajak looked at that beautiful muskrat he was holding and the beautiful world the muskrat had created, and he took another deep breath and he blew into the muskrat. And Muskrat, she woke. She took her very first sacred breath. She was so thankful for Wasakajak to give her life back and give her another opportunity to share and give to her friends. And all of the animals were so thankful and humbled for Muskrat's sacrifice, because without her sacrifice, we would never be here. And that is the story of the muskrat and the Cree creation story. And so now I'm going to share the creator song. The creator song is, it was gifted to me from a friend of mine, Elizabeth Potskin, who I am trying to get a hold of. So if anybody knows where she is, please text me her number, because I miss her a lot. She's been on my heart and on my mind, and all of her social media has gone out. So please, if anyone knows where she is, I'm trying to get a hold of her, because, you know, her cat misses her. But, she had gifted me this song in exchange for me working on one of her songs, and it was just such a beautiful exchange. But when she shared the song, I knew it. I just really knew it, and I knew it in my soul and my core, and so I learned it very, very quickly, and I brought it to my great aunt to drum and sing and share with her, because I love to go there and visit her to drum and sing. And the strangest thing happened is when I sang this song for her for the very first time, she started singing with me, and I was like, "Auntie, how do you know this song?" And she looked at me and she said, "How do you know this song? This is our family song. It's been missing for about 40 years. Where did you find it? And how did you bring it home?" And so when she said that, I just broke down and I cried. But when we're on the right path, the things that are meant to be held and the things that are meant to come back and through will come back. And this song is part of that. And so the Creator song teaches us that everything in creation is sacred. We're not above or below creation, we're part of it. So it teaches us to really engage, be part of it, show respect for the land, show respect for each other. When we say all my relations, it's not just people, it is, you know, the two-leggeds, which is the people, it's the four-leggeds, it's the creepy crawlies, it's the swimmers, it's the flyers, it's everything, it's all of those things, because they all have a spirit, they all have a soul. When everyone got that sacred breath, we all share that sacred breath, the sacred breath of creation. And so this song really honors that. It honors that sacred breath that we all share. It honors our beautiful Mother Earth and how it connects and takes care of each and every one of us. And so this is the Creator song. Whoops. I'm stepping on the sash. Actually, I ran it over with the chair. That was really uncomfortable. And so I'm going to shoot 2 more songs because I gotta take it off, but I have a whole bunch of drums and voiceover work to do. So, this song, this is, the Wende Aho got stuck in my head. So this is the 4 Direction song, or I learned it as the 4 Direction song. And this song is called the Cherokee Morning Song as well. It is from Robbie Robertson and Ulali. It's really lovely, and in it you can hear the 4 directions, you can hear the 4 winds, and so this is just to honor the 4 winds that are blowing, and the seasons as they are changing, and to really usher in that new life, those new beginnings, and hopefully have a lot more rain where we need it, and a lot less rain where we don't. And so this is the Wende Aho, the 4 Winds or 4 Direction song, or the Cherokee Morning Song. It can be found on YouTube. Wende Aho, Wende Aho, Wende Aho, Wende Aho, ho 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 ya ha ya ya ya. Wende Aho, with a traveling song before I go. So this song is an Anishinaabe song that I learned from my elder Shampoo Turner and had left when we lost her. I didn't think I'd ever hear the song again, and then it came back to me. Like I said, when you're on the right path, things that are meant to come back into your life, they do. And the same people that have always been, and those really high and good moments in your life tend to recirculate when you're back on the right path. And so, yeah, this is the traveling song. May everyone have a beautiful week ahead. Thank you so much for joining me this day. I'll see you next Tuesday. And have a very, very beautiful week. And hopefully the weather holds up. Miigwech, everyone. Hi, hi. And Marcy. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. 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 Hey ya, hey ya, sorry. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, oh. 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 Hey ya, Awesome. Well, hi everyone. Miigwech, thank you so much for joining me again. I will see you next week. And yeah, my name is Shanta. I will see you soon. And please feel free to share. I know there's a lot of opportunities for community building, and I think it's such a beautiful gift to be able to do that. So yeah, that's why I'm here. So share away and have a beautiful week, and I hope to see you all soon. Miigwech. Good night.